Heroic British figures have been under attack for quite some time now, and figures such as Winston Churchill are quite a good example of that, but also figures like Sir Francis Drake. And in my opinion, this is an attempt to destroy our history, our heritage and our national pride and supplant it with globalist, corporatist progressivism, really, or any sort of amalgamation of those ideologies. But why am I talking about this? Well, Sir Francis Drake Primary School to be renamed following Black Lives Matter protests, which is a little bit ridiculous in my opinion if you actually know the history. And I'm going to be talking about the history once I've read a little bit from this article. So this Telegraph article reads as follows. Sir Francis Drake Primary School will be renamed in the light of the seamen's slave trade links. The famed navigator became an English national hero for helping defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588, but his legacy was reassessed following Black Lives Matter protests, and the connections to slavery have made him a contentious figure. The Sir Francis Drake School in South London will be renamed Twin Oaks Primary, its head teacher has announced, informing parents the slave trade links associated with the current name sat at odds with the values of our school.
Really? I thought Twin Oaks Primary was a proud institution. Celebrated the Confederacy. No?
Yes, all of our schools, we just presume, they celebrate slavery unless otherwise explicitly saying so.
Who is this nonce? Like, he's just sat around like, people think I support slavery, I better do something. I don't.
It is silly, isn't it? It carries on to say, the primary in Lewisham consulted on a name change in 2022 and received 450 responses from parents, staff, pupils and the local community. This is a school in London, I believe, so I wonder how many of them actually know who Drake is. Apparently, a letter sent from the school to parents states that the overwhelming majority of respondents voted in favour of changing the school's current name with Twin Oaks, a reference to the two trees standing outside the school, found to be the most popular alternative. The decision to consult on a new name was taken by the school's governing body and will require a change of logo for the primary, as the current design depicts a 16th century ship. Ooh, scary. The head teacher of the school, Karen Cartwright, so a literal Karen, has sought to assure parents that they will not have to pay out for new branded uniforms as a result of the change. So yes, this is obviously silly, but what I wanted to do was talk about Drake's history.
And Thundercock going to turn up and shoot us down.
So Drake, here's a picture of him here, a portrait. He's actually very much associated with my home county of Devon. He was born in Tavistock, which is about an hour away from Plymouth, which is the city which both I grew up and so did he. So he's a bit of a personal hero of the people of Plymouth in the southwest. You're obviously well acquainted with Devon as well.
They all love slavery.
Yes, we do. That's the only county that loves it.
Yeah, it's just them,
not really. But yes, this is a legend. He was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, and he did so in one single voyage, and was only the second person in the world ever to do so. He was a notable and talented privateer, or pirate, depending on who you are, who plundered and destroyed many Spanish ships, stealing... Privateer. Stuck it to the Spaniards. You've got to be a privateer, right? He was the personal nemesis of the King of Spain, who referred to him as El Draco, the dragon, and put a significant price on his head, the equivalent to £7,200,000 in today's money, 2022 money to be specific, and he resoundingly defeated the Spanish invasion in one of the most famous naval battles in history. But no, that he's a slaver, therefore bad. But I'm going to go through his life, give you a little bit of a taster of why it's not fair to just dismiss someone because of something they did in a small portion of their life. So he was born the eldest of 12 sons to a Protestant farmer in Tavistock in Devon, which is still quite a rural area to this day. It's not exactly a place where you go to look for work. However, due to religious persecution, obviously Protestants that early on in the 16th century, still under some amount of persecution from the majority Catholic population, they were persecuted during the Prayer Book Rebellion in 1549, and the family moved to the Medway in Kent. At a young age, he returned to Devonshire and Plymouth, to receive training in seafaring from his wealthy relative, William Hawkins, whom he was effectively brought up by. And then eventually Drake returned to Kent for some time and began work on a bark, which is basically a free-mast ship, transporting goods to France and the Netherlands. His captain was so impressed with his conduct that he bequeathed the vessel to him upon his death, although Drake didn't really have the finances to continue running the operation that he was running. The guy who gave him the ship had no living relatives, so that's why he did that. He wasn't just that good. Worth mentioning. After he returned to Hawkins, because of course he had a boat and no money to run it, he roped him into being part of a crew of England's first ever slave expedition. And of course, it wasn't as if Drake had many options here. He had a boat with not much to do with it, and an uncle who wanted to go slaving.
And literally no human
Or a
on
cousin.
Earth thought slavery was bad.
So the Portuguese and Spanish had a monopoly on the slave trade at this point, and Hawkins saw it as an opportunity to make money while sticking it to England's competitors, which is quite a patriotic duty, although it feels a bit strange to say that about slavery.
Enslave the Africans to own the Spaniards.
There is certainly an element of that in this. I'm not saying it's right.
That's a serious meme game.
So the expedition was successful, and Queen Elizabeth I, the Queen obviously at the time, personally commissioned them to do so for a second time. So after the success of this, Drake was compelled by the Queen herself to do it again. So although he'd probably made some money from the expedition to potentially set up on his own, you can't exactly say, you know what, Queen Elizabeth I, I have some moral questions about this. She'd just be like, no, off with your head then.
All I'm getting is that the Blackadder rendition is more true than I thought.
I can't remember it too well.
For people who don't know, it's you have Drake turn up and Queen Elizabeth is just sort of in love with him because he's basically Lord Flashard, but recast.
I mean, that is basically his life. So the second expedition as well was a success, and then they did a third one on behest of the Queen, and it was a failure, despite the assistance of the Sierra Leonean king, who supplied them with the slaves and caught them for them, but they were plagued by storms and attacked by the Spanish, so they lost lots of ships, and Drake thought that Hawkins was dead in the battle, so Drake fled back to England with some of the surviving crew, thinking he was the only person to survive. However, upon arriving back at England, Hawkins accused Drake of desertion and of stealing the treasure that they'd accumulated, which Drake basically said, I didn't do this, sorry, it was an honest mistake. And lots of the contemporary sources at the time honestly believed that Drake was being honest. But nevertheless, Drake and Hawkins parted ways, and not only did slavery stop in England, for at least for a while, because of this disastrous expedition, but Drake never captured another slave again after this, because he wasn't
never catch any purchase.
Yes, well,
I mean, like, you've got the Jeff Bezos of slavery there in Sierra Leone, but he's the one doing the capturing.
That's true, yeah. But it seems like when he was basically compelled to work for Hawkins to make ends meet, he was being made to go on these slavery expeditions, but it didn't seem to be where his heart was at. He didn't want to do this, I don't think. So with the consent of the Queen, and with a new vendetta against the Spaniards, he began attacking the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean and South America as a privateer, or if you're Spanish, a pirate. What was that?
Based.
It is very based. He was able to capture lots of Spanish gold and silver, freed many Spanish slaves who he then allied himself with and recruited into his crew. He paid these freed slaves the same as Englishmen as well, which is unusual for the time. He also treated them no different, almost like he treated them like human beings, which is strange and very unusual for the time. So the fact that people are going after him is a little bit strange, and in fact, he was known as, in South America, by the slave population as being a bit of a hero, and many freed slaves who Drake did not even personally free himself would go over to his side and say, "Are you Drake? We want to fight for you." So it seems to me that this reputation for being a slaver, well, he was freeing lots and lots of slaves, probably more than he ever helped capture as just a crew member. He wasn't even, the one pulling the strings
You couldn't pick a worse target to be like, yeah, just a slave trader.
Yes. I mean, come on. He freed far more slaves than he personally captured, because he personally captured none, technically. Although he was part of the crew, and I mean, considering Germany's going after typists at concentration camps, I feel like that's not enough degrees of separation in the modern world.
It's also not the same thing.
That's true.
Slavery isn't genocide, as Starkey has let us know.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So he paid them the same wages. He also had a right-hand man who was himself a freed African slave called Diego, and he was actually a close friend. And when he was killed by the Spanish, Drake was both aggrieved and furious, and he killed every Spaniard implicated in his death. This was one of the people that helped him circumnavigate the globe as well. He also once sent a young black boy as an envoy to the Spanish, and they killed the young lad. I don't know how old he was, they just say he was a boy. And Drake demanded that the Spanish hand over the man who killed him, and when they refused, he threatened to kill a Catholic priest every week until they were held to justice. So the Spanish eventually relented. So he seemed to take it quite seriously. He wouldn't go to the trouble of finding these Catholic priests. He would have just killed the Spanish, probably. So in 1577, under the instruction of the Queen, he began a 3-year journey to circumnavigate the world. He went from England around South America, past California, across the Southeast Asian islands, and around South Africa and back to England again, which took 3 years, and he returned to England with cargo of foreign spices and Spanish treasure. So even when he was tasked with circumnavigating the globe, he still came back with Spanish gold. What a legend. So the Queen had half a share of this, which surpassed the Crown's entire income for the year. So as you can imagine, he was pretty popular. So the Blackadder representation, probably true. I mean, if someone came back and was just like, here you are, here's more than your income for the year, I think I would like them. I don't know. So when he returned, Queen Elizabeth knighted Drake aboard his ship, the Golden Hind, which is obviously a very famous ship, and awarded him a portrait of herself, which is a bit strange, but it's pretty unusual for a commoner to receive this. Just like, here, I've got a gift for you. It's a picture of me. I mean, come on. But never mind. With his newfound wealth, he bought Buckland Abbey near Yelverton in Devon, not to be confused with nearby Buckfast Abbey, which produces the Buckfast tonic wine, which is the bane of the Scottish, but very nice. Ever had it before?
I think so. I just can't remember.
It's so full of caffeine, though, that it's so terrible for you.
It's just this really cheap shit. Sorry, I shouldn't swear, but...
It's made by monks. It's holy elixir.
Yeah, right.
So he went on to be the mayor of Plymouth. He also went on to be elected to Parliament on 3 separate occasions. And despite his newfound wealth and status, he was instructed by the Queen to return to America to attack the Spanish and to protect the English colonists in North America. Upon his success in the Americas, the Spanish were understandably furious, and the English crown caught wind that they intended to send a massive invasion force to England. So Drake was sent to northern Spain, Cadiz to be precise, to destroy the invasion fleet in the harbour before it arrived in English waters. And Drake successfully carried out a raid in Cadiz and claimed to have sunk 39 ships, and the Spanish claimed it was only 25, but that's still quite a few, which delayed the invasion for an entire year. Drake was then promoted to Vice Admiral of the English fleet and charged with defeating the Spanish. When the invasion finally arrived in the English waters, he was rumoured to have been nonchalantly playing a game of bowls on the Plymouth waterfront. And despite the insistence of the messenger that he needs to act immediately, the invasion is on its way, he said he wanted to win his game of bowls before defeating the Spanish. What a legend. Of course, if this story is true, this may seem a bit complacent and arrogant, but actually it's likely that the winds and tides in the Plymouth Sound, which can be quite averse to sailing even to this day, as I well know, might have prevented him from leaving port. So it might just be that
also,
he was
I can
unable.
wait 10 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a massive naval battle. 10 minutes doesn't mean that much, really. So Drake's response to the Spanish fleet's battle formation off the coast was pretty unconventional. Because the ships were in formation ready for battle, they were relatively close together and therefore less manoeuvrable. So Drake predicted this would happen because, this is conventional at the time. So he sent a fleet of fire ships into the formation, which caused chaos. And a fire ship is basically a ship that's on fire. I mean, who'd have thought? So rather than actually sending crewed vessels and fighting the Spanish fairly, I suppose, I mean, there's no such thing as a fair war, really. But he sent all these fire ships across, and it pretty much caused chaos, burnt lots of Spanish ships, and made them flee, which then he pursued them when they were fleeing by his crewed ships. And they were pursued all the way off the coast of Scotland, where many of the Spanish ships, if not all, were destroyed by a storm. So he basically lost very few men, defeating an entire Spanish invasion force through his clever planning. And you can't really say, well, someone else would have come up with this, because this hadn't really been a precedent before Drake. So the victory is very much up to him, I think. After this, of course, he was renowned as a national hero, and he continued his campaigns against the Spanish in the Americas into his mid-50s before dying of dysentery at the age of 56 in 1596. And before dying, he asked to be dressed in his full armour, to be buried at sea in a lead-lined coffin a few miles off the coast of Portobello in Panama. And if the Uncharted games are to be believed, he was buried with a diary which would lead to El Dorado, the treasure. But obviously that's fictional. But no one's found his coffin yet, so you never know. Maybe he was on a final secret mission for the Queen. But yes.
Oh, look, the secret of life belonged to the Spanish. Yoink.
He just heard that it was a great big gold Spanish statue, and it's just like, oh, some Spanish gold that I haven't taken off them yet.
I mean, to be honest, this whole story does make me think that God definitely isn't Spanish. That's about it.
But yes, obviously, the sum of the man's life is far greater than those few slavery expeditions that he went on. That's the reason that I gave an entire history of his life, is that when you look at the historic figure and have knowledge of the history behind it, all of a sudden that aspect, that small part of their life, isn't nearly as significant as all of the other things that they did. And you say that someone who defeated an entire army without losing any men, or circumnavigated the world, and made lots of gold in the process, and a sort of rags to riches story, who doesn't find that compelling? If that isn't the kind of person we should have a statue and have buildings named after, who can we do those things for? So if you want to learn a bit more, I had a conversation with Beau, who is our resident history expert, about the life of Sir Francis Drake on the website. This is obviously not just a quick history. This was almost a 2-hour conversation. So if you want the details about the swashbuckling adventures of Sir Francis Drake, I very much suggest you check it out. So this isn't the first time that Drake's been attacked either. So here's an article from Plymouth Live. Petition calls for the removal of Sir Francis Drake statues from Plymouth Hoe, which is the name of the waterfront. It's not some unfortunate lady. So this was in June of 2020, so in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests that had absolutely nothing to do with the city of Plymouth whatsoever. I mean, it's a pretty, what's the word? It doesn't have much immigration, let's just say that. So there wasn't really much of a...
Not that that would matter. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Just like, yes, we're a bunch of white people and we're really offended about how this city treats black people, even though there are hardly any here. Bit strange.
I mean, Barbados is full of black people and they're upset about how black people are being treated, even though there are no white people in any position of power. So...
It doesn't even matter, does it? Yeah. So there were lots of people calling to remove it, and thankfully in this next article, the council announced that the statue would stay. Thank goodness for the fact that there are lots of conservatives in Devon. I mean, it's unsurprising that I've come from there, really. But unfortunately, if we move to the next article again, they did put a plaque or update the plaque to say that he also was involved in the slave trade. But they did also list this amongst all of the other stuff. So, I mean, although I don't agree with the sentiment, I think a full history of someone is good. I mean, he did trade in slaves for a little while, although I don't think describing him as a slave trader is fair. At least call him...
It's sort of like calling the guy who runs Private Eye a magazine salesman. So, well, yeah, but... like, he's kind of a journalist.
It's like... I'm trying to think of a as silly an alternative, but I can't even think of one.
I don't know. YouTubers, what are they? T-shirt salesmen. Just all them. It's all
Well,
merch stores.
You're winning me over now.
Yeah.
So if you move on to the next one, also, of course, where he was born in Tavistock, also has a statue of him. And this was also protected. So thankfully, with sufficient numbers of people who appreciate him, because he's still a local hero in Devonshire, and particularly the south of Devon, where he's most associated, so the cities of Plymouth and Tavistock, we know Drake, we appreciate Drake, and we're taught about his history, and we know that he is a proper English hero to be revered. John has said, if you owned a car, you're a car salesman. That's true. But yes, this is a man who deserves places to be named after him. He started from nothing and became the Vice Admiral of the British Navy through many successes. He stuck it to the Spanish, and he is a hero that is worthy of reverence. He's not just a slave trader. History is a bit more complicated than that, and I think that we shouldn't be changing the names of these sorts of places. We have to have respect for our history and understand it properly, and then maybe we'll make some more reasonable decisions.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series that Bo does, this one on Tiberius Caesar Augustus. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.